And you mentioned moving away from shame, and you've written about this, but you also mentioned that there's two kinds of shame. And it was interesting when you first said, you want to kind of get rid of this idea of shame. And myself, I reacted, I like, you don't want to get rid of all shame. There's a healthy shame.
Yes.
And you called it integrative, I think shame is the term, and then disintegrative.
Disintegrative, yes.
Yeah. Can you explain those two different types of shame that are being employed when we're talking about this centered set idea?
Yes. And so I'm obviously those are more technical, big words. I borrowed those from social scientists. I didn't make that up. But and just to affirm you. And so the book I co-authored with Jason, Ministering Honor Shame Content. I mean, that was a key thing for us, is that there are things that are shameful. So it's, shame is appropriate at times. But then how do you respond to it? So disintegrative shame is when there's a spirit of stigmatizing the person. So you're shaming them, and it's with
non-redemptive.
You're not concerned with their restoration. And this is, I'm talking. That's why I pause. It's just like bounded just leaps at me. In a bounded church, the line is more important than the person. Okay, and I'm careful. That's a general statement. That's not true in every situation. But the tendency in a bounded church is to prioritize the line over the person. And so disintegrative shaming is when you shame a person and you're not seeking the person's restoration, you stigmatize them, and it prioritizes something else. And so to me, when you asked the question, I just immediately thought Pharisees and Jesus. So the Pharisees practice disintegrative shaming, and their crusade, their method for achieving holiness was to shame people, and they are more focused on the rules. Okay, now integrative shaming is it still may cause the person shame, but the goal is to restore the person. So Galatians 6:1, Paul says, if someone amongst you is sinning, then, those among you spiritual brothers and sisters, restore them, talk to them with gentleness.
And be careful lest you yourself are tempted. That's in that part of it too, because they're but for the grace of God go I. So anyway, keep going. I just want to make sure I added that part of that.
So I think, and I think of, where I really like to talk about this is, and as just an example, is Luke 7 of the woman in the house of Simon the Pharisee. And so she has been shamed by her community in a disintegrative way. She's trashed, she's looked down upon, and Jesus is honoring her, lifting her up. But in the context of that story, Jesus says to Simon, but look, since I came in here, you didn't wash my feet. You didn't greet me with a kiss. You didn't anoint my head with oil. That's a shaming move. I mean, he's calling Simon out. So he's putting a spotlight on him. But what's Jesus's intention? He doesn't get up and storm out. He is seeking for Simon the Pharisee to turn away from his ways, because it would be better for him and the community. So integrative shaming, so a fuzzy set would not practice any kind of shaming.
Well, not intentionally, because you mentioned
correct,
that,
right?
There is a shame if you don't follow our tolerance virtue.
Exactly.
Then there is a form of shame. It's just a different kind. Anyway, keep going.
And actually, when the first draft of the book, I had 8 or 9 practitioners read over it and give me input, and a couple of them who had more experience in fuzzy churches, they argued that churches don't actually stay fuzzy very long, but the thing that the one thing you can't do in a fuzzy church is to be judgmental, but that in itself is judgmental. So yes, got off track there a bit, but yes, I agree with you on that, that's that kind of shame. But so, yeah, the fuzzy wouldn't, whereas in centered, again, it would be call up. And if we go to where you started with, this person with kind of this false vulnerability, I think that's why in a centered, we walk with people. Yeah, maybe, and and you can come back and ask it differently or say something. But what I thought of when you said that was, when I started the book, okay, so I don't have the answers to my students' questions. So I went out and interviewed numerous pastors, church leaders, ministry leaders to ask them, how are you seeking to live out this centered approach? And what I imagined the book would be this collection of case studies. So, here's this person, this situation, what's the centered approach? And then this next situation, this next, but very quickly, I mean, within the first 3 or 4 interviews I did, I realized, oh no, that's totally wrong thinking, Mark. Like, there is not a centered approach to deal with this particular situation. And part of that is because of, like you mentioned, so we have 2 people that are in the same kind of situation, and one person is giving this sort of vulnerability about it, but you perceive it's false vulnerability. And another person is, torn up, repentant. In a centered church, you would have the necessity and the possibility of responding to those people in different ways.